All right, D&D enthusiasts, the new edition of D&D getting ready to drop. Confirmed, 2024. What's the code word? D&D new. So we have been graced with the ability to now take a look at the playtesting and help contribute to the game. Do I sound skeptical? I'm usually not skeptical. I mean, being a D&D enthusiast, a role-playing RPG enthusiast, wargaming enthusiast, board gaming enthusiast, I look for what's interesting. I look for the possibility to create those awesome gaming moments and roll some dice, but I'm a little bit skeptical. Now, I'm not surprised, and I don't think we should be surprised because if you've been playing D&D for a while, you know there's a cycle. You know that you buy the books, you buy the adventures, the modules, the supplements. You've got a huge bookcase full of stuff that you just look at and you're like, wow, this is amazing, and you're inspired. They've made the money. So now they've got to get you to rebuy everything. So it's like, guess what? We've rebooted it. If you're lucky, you didn't get caught in the D&D 3.0, 3.5 trap where they released 3.0 and then very quickly were like, yeah, it's 3.5 now. If there's a little bit of life to it. So we can see that. We knew it was coming. And of course, can I call it Dragonlance? With the release of Dragonlance, that's kind of a final cash infusion because it's going to pull in some new players. The old existing AD&D players are, of course, even though they're like, there's only one version of Kryn, they're going to check it out. They're going to get a massive cash infusion, and then that's going to roll them into the grumble of D&D new. Playtesting. And I'm trying to be positive. I am. Not the game itself, not the community, but the company and the rollout. There's nothing to play test. D&D 4 was a disaster, an absolute disaster, and I understand why. And I've gone on record saying I actually enjoyed playing D&D 0.4. I think it tried to change too much too fast, but it was an interesting D&D experience. I mean, that's also because I'm a wargamer, and it was more like D&D the war game to tie in with some miniatures and some other things and some virtual tools that never materialized because the tech wasn't quite there at the moment. But that was such a disaster. That was like the one thing that actually united the D&D community. It was such a disaster that almost immediately they announced, hey, we're going to do a new edition of D&D, and it's going to be play tested, and we're going to hear your voice, and we're going to get community feedback. And they realized that was good publicity. That was really good kind of pretending we're listening to the community. That was fantastic because the grumble bugs kept them quiet. The enthusiasts jumped right in, and it was just a free publicity cycle to release up to it. That's all they're doing again. Everything's done. Everything's ready. If it's releasing in 2024, it's ready to go. It's absolutely ready to go. So I expect that we're going to see a lot more confirmation and a lot more kind of hard info, hard leaks, as opposed to here's kind of the beta play test and we want to get your feedback. Like, no. Okay, is that too skeptical? Well, let's jump over to the play style, what we've seen so far and what's been talked about. It is going to be backwards compatible. I agree with that to some extent. I mean, that makes sense because what's interesting is, and this is like a whole nother topic in itself, but what's interesting is war gamers, D&D coming from wargaming roots and early D&D being based on wargaming. As a wargamer, you are conditioned to accept that there's going to be a new edition every couple of years. And when that new edition comes, your miniatures for your wargaming army, you're going to have to update, you're going to have to change, you're going to have to switch around a little bit. That's just like part of wargaming. But as things have become more mainstream, as things have evolved and as the gaming culture has evolved, people are starting to say, I don't want a new edition. Like, why is this edition creep? Why is this rollover? So what we're seeing definitely with D&D, but also with other wargaming systems like Games Workshop, we're not calling it a new edition. We're calling it an update. We're calling it evergreen. We're calling it a living rule set. So they're kind of, I see them taking that approach where it's like, look, it's new D&D, code word, but it's still the same D&D. It's just an upgrade. Your older stuff will still work. It's a living thing. Well, in theory, but how the game is aligning, it's aligning away from the current edition of D&D. I just see little pieces of that, and I'm not saying good or bad, but I think backwards compatibility is going to be there, but it's going to be a pain to try and make that happen. It really is. And long term, I just don't see it with all the supplements and all the books. Like, I'm having flashbacks to D&D 3.5, where there were so many books, so many supplements, so many different things to add that it was kind of chaos to try and play. And I'm open to playing, anything you want to play and any supplement, homebrew stuff. I'm used to the heavy lifting. I'm used to handling that. But I know the chaos that was, as a dungeon master and as a player, that was 3.5 towards the end of the cycle. That's where it's going to evolve out. So we can call it an upgrade. We can call it a living rule set. It's going to be a new edition, especially as they implement some of these radical changes that they've been talking about for the game. So what I'm seeing, and again, what little I've seen as we go through, character creation looks to be streamlined. Character creation looks to be a little bit more narrative. And I like this idea. Character creation for D&D, that's the first big hurdle to jump as a player, because there's a lot of decisions to make. You're trying to figure out what your character is going to do. Forget about projecting levels ahead and saying, well, based on my stats, based on what I'm selecting, like, where do I want to be in level 5 or level 10? The best analogy that I can compare that to, now as a veteran player, I'm used to planning out to level 20. That's part of the game. I love it. For comparison, when I jumped into Lord of the Rings, the living card game, it's a deck builder. You build various decks to take on quests. 1/3 of the game, or half of the game, is deck building to prepare for the quest. And I jumped in with a good friend who was already well established, and he was just a machine. And again, half the game is plotting things out. Trying to figure that out, I was like, this is very overwhelming. I'm building my decks. I'm trying to figure out cards that I'm going to burn. I'm attachments, different heroes I'm going to take to keep the threat level down. It was fun, but it was a big learning curve. D&D has that feel right now. It always kind of had that feel. It's less right now, but the character background where you roll and you figure things out, from that perspective, it's a step in the right direction, but D&D New is going to streamline that and make that easier. I think that's good. Because new players, it'll pull into the game, it'll get them playing the game. And much like character creation right now, if you're a veteran player, I don't need to roll for background and see where I'm coming and do all that stuff. The character biography, I can just create that. So that's interesting. Changes on classes. I'm sure we'll get 1 or 2 new classes. I'm sure the continued classes will be there. It'll be interesting to see some of the other settings that they've talked about in D&D, if they're going to pull in those classes and make them permanent into the game, independent of a campaign. I'd like to see that. Now, is that going to be in the core module? Is that going to be in supplements? I'd like to see 1 or 2 additions into the core as kind of brought into standard D&D. I also expect other things. I expect a lot of the hard-coded stats, and I'm seeing a little bit of that. A lot of the hard-coded stats, where if you do this, you get +2 here and +2 there. Or if you do this, you get +2 here and -2 there. I see that being obliterated. I see that basically being like, here's your class and here's your points. Spread them out however you want. Whatever you want to do, spread them out. So really, the idea of class is just going to open up later on what you can do, but the initial starting points for stats and skills and abilities, I think that's going to be obliterated, because that's kind of an interesting point as the game has evolved. Excited or not? Well, are you excited or not? I mean, again, I'm just kind of shrugging my shoulders in that, okay, we knew there was going to be a new edition of D&D because they got to get everybody to rebuy everything. It will have limited backwards compatibility. but don't call it a living rule set. That's not how the cycle, the money is made. From the perspective of improvements and streamlining, I think yes. And the current edition of D&D plays very well, is a fantastic addition. But if we're going to reboot and evolve, then let's find those stress points. Let's find those areas that could use a little bit of a push and improve them. The final piece of excitement for me, any edition of D&D that switches, it's a chance to enjoy D&D in a new way, with a new vision, a new voice, to jump in. And there's always an influx of new players. And by new players, it could be people jumping into the game because they're hearing about it for the first time or they've discovered it. Or new players as in they played a previous edition of D&D and for whatever reason stopped playing for a little bit and are back in the game. So from the perspective of a dungeon master and from the perspective of a player, that excites me because that window, that first I want to say year and a half when there's a new edition of D&D, it's an exciting time. It's exciting to go through that cycle. And I want to be in a place as a player and as a dungeon master to meet new friends, to play some new adventures, roll some new dice, and really live in that moment and take advantage of that cycle. So I guess from my perspective, the rules, the changes, D&D new, whatever we're going to call it, I'm going to play it. We're going to have fun. We're going to roll some dice. We're going to tell some great stories. It'll be whatever it is, and I'm fine with that. I'm more excited about the actual release and the excitement that is going to create, that D&D portal, that D&D window for that year, year and a half. That's more exciting to me than however this new edition shakes up. So I'm going to turn it over to you guys. D&D new, playtesting. You think your vision and voice is going to make any difference? Skeptic mode back on? Or do you think it's look, we just need to generate some free publicity and give this idea that it's like a living world, a living document? I mean, just to publish something, the proofreading, the setting up, the templates, the distribution, 2024 means this was wrapped up 2 years ago. Just the logistics on that. So, and again, skeptic mode off. It is D&D. We're going to roll some dice. We're going to have some fun. And 2024... or maybe 2025 if it releases a little bit later, it's going to be here quick. So we'll be ready for that excitement.